Welcome to SlashBack Cinema, the podcast where we rewind to the glory days of 70s and 80s horror classics. I am Shawnee Luft.
And I'm Ryan Drymiller.
We miss those iconic and cheesy horror films from our childhood, from slashers to the supernatural. So we're here to rewatch the classics that made us scream, maybe cringe a little, and find out if they still pack a punch or just make us laugh. Ryan, what's on the menu for today?
Today, in our holiday classics, we are going to start off this month with Gremlins from 1984. This is directed by Joe Dante, written by Chris Columbus, and starred Zach Gallen and Phoebe Cates.
Now, you must have seen this movie.
Oh, yeah. I mean, who did not see this movie as a young kid in America back in the 80s? This was right up there with E.T. and Raiders and Star Wars in my book.
Came out in 1984. What a year for movies. So many great movies came out, like 82, 83, 84.
Yeah, we were talking about like The Thing last time, and just back to back. I think this came out right around the same time as Ghostbusters too.
I think they opened the same weekend.
Yeah, who plans this stuff? Like,
yeah,
giant iconic movies. Let's just open them the same weekend.
Like two horror comedy classics. It's like an embarrassment of riches.
Totally. It was funny when digging this one up to watch it. In my mind, I always thought this was a Steven Spielberg movie, but I realized that he was actually the executive producer and not the director. Was this the first one for Amblin Entertainment?
It was like really early on.
Yeah.
And Spielberg did have his mitts all over this. He saw the script by Chris Columbus, and he read it. He loved it. He picked the director. And he also changed the story. Did you look into like the history of this movie at all and how they changed? It was much more of a horror movie until Spielberg Spielbergified it and made it a little more family friendly.
There was definitely some scenes that either, I don't know if they filmed them or they were written in that were like would have taken it to an extremely dark place and that got trimmed. Yeah, it sounds like that was Spielberg.
So we'll get into that in a little bit. So let's just talk about the plot first. So you want to do a quick summary?
Sure. It kicks off with Randall Peltzer. He was an inventor walking through the streets of Chinatown. He winds up wandering into a Chinese store of sorts. They're selling all different types of merchandise, and he discovers that hidden in one of these baskets is this mysterious creature you later find out is a Mogwai. The old Chinese gentleman doesn't want to sell it, but his grandson does sell it to Randall. He brings it home and gives it to his son as a Christmas present. He's been given 3 rules around this Mogwai and inadvertently breaks one of them, and it sets off a release of these mischievous monsters who wreak havoc on this small town. It's also set during the Christmas season, thus we're bringing it into the fold here as it's quite cloaked in all the trappings of Christmas and holiday celebrations.
Yeah, when we started SlashBack, we were talking about all these Christmas horror movies, and I think Gremlins might have been one of the first ones that popped into our heads. Although it didn't come out at Christmas time, right? I think it came out like in the summer.
It came out in June, and actually talking to Jen, my wife, she was saying that for her 8th birthday, this is the movie that she went to see with all of her friends.
Wow.
Which it did sound like some of her friends were not allowed to see this movie because it was a bit on the naughty list in terms of the violence and the gore. It must have had a run through the holiday season, but it is always strange when they kick off a Christmas movie in the summer.
Yeah, it was just incredibly popular. I think Ghostbusters did better box office and it's more famous, but God, Gremlins was a classic. I liked this movie so much when I was a kid. I was just really into the story and the characters and the special effects. I just thought this was great. But I did hear about a lot of people who had the experience that Jen had, that because Spielberg's name was on it and it came out shortly after E.T., and apparently the trailers did not communicate that this is going to be a horror movie.
Yeah.
That a lot of parents were traumatized. Oh, and there was no PG-13 rating at the time, so it was rated PG.
I think this came out, and that's what set off the creation of the new PG-13 rating, because it was this and Temple of Doom also had quite a bit of darkness to it.
Yeah, it's like Spielberg single-handedly carves out a new rating between PG and R.
Yeah. I was also similarly obsessed with this movie as a kid. I loved it and saw it multiple times. Loved Mogwai. I was so into it, in fact, that I think in 8th grade there was this sculpting material called Sculpey, and I basically sculpted my own Mogwai.
Wow.
Coated in fur. Like it wasn't a full puppet, but it was pretty good likeness for.
What happened to your Mogwai? Did you keep it?
I did keep it for a while, but I think eventually that was one of the things that, an ear falls off, perhaps The fur gets a little moth-eaten, and
Oh,
it's just time for the garbage,
It happens to the best of us.
kind of like us now.
We're going to end up in the garbage like your Mogwai. Rewatching it, it surprised me how much I still love this movie. I don't think I've seen it in 20 years, but it is so fun. It really holds up. I was watching a little bit about the making of this movie, and holy cow, it was so complicated. This kind of puppet technology, it was really new. And so to make these characters look expressive, they had to build all these different kinds of Mogwai creatures. There were so many different electronics, and it was similar to the Star Wars movies in that it required just a huge puppeteering team to bring this stuff to life, and just enormous amount of planning.
And it sounds like they had a couple different iterations in terms of how they were going to execute these. Obviously, they ended up in more of the marionette puppet space. But I did read something about they were saying at one point they thought they were going to use monkeys and if it had put masks on them, and the monkeys freaked out, and they were like, well, I guess we're not having monkey gremlins. So.
Yeah, I'd like to watch the outtakes of Monkey Gremlins. When you watched it, were there parts that you hadn't remembered that were new to you, that jumped out? Or
I remembered like the broad strokes, but not all of the actual individual scenes baked into, say, that bar scene or the movie theater.
Yeah.
But the one thing that I didn't remember, Phoebe Cates's character, Kate, is talking to Billy, the lead character, about how she doesn't like Christmas, and she's talking about it's like this dark time for some people during the holidays, and it leads to depression and sometimes even suicide. And I was thinking to myself, wow, this movie's really progressive, talking about mental health issues. And then I forgot about the part where then she does the reveal on like the backstory of how her dad died.
Yes.
Oh, he was dressed in a Santa Claus suit. He'd been climbing down the chimney on Christmas Eve. His arm.
Yeah. But it wasn't just that. Her mom and her made a fire and then started to smell the beds. I was like, watching it with Lessa and my daughter, and she was like, this is really dark.
Yeah, and I saw an interview with, I can't remember if it was the director or the writer, but he said, we thought that scene would be funny about her dad dying in the chimney, but it doesn't play funny. It plays horrifying.
And then I started reflecting and thinking that, wow, I think this is set in Christmas because whoever, maybe Joe Dante or whoever's producing this movie, they really hated Christmas. They were like, see what happens?
That idea of a person dying in the chimney was an old wives' tale, or like an old story that people had heard before that they just worked into the plot. But yeah, I did remember that part. Also, because I'm Jewish, I didn't celebrate Christmas as a kid. And so I never really got into Christmas. And so I think I always liked Gremlins because I maybe related to Phoebe Cates' character just not feeling like Christmas was for her. And the other characters, like her boyfriend Billy, are like, how can you not like Christmas? And I was watching it going, yeah, I don't like Christmas. So yeah, that part stood out to me as like maybe one of the things I liked about the movie is I could relate to one of the main characters, even though I don't have any trauma around Christmas.
And speaking of relating to main characters, before we go into scenes and other notes on the movie, this starred Phoebe Cates. I just had a huge crush on her.
Yeah, God, she had like this girl next door kind of personality. She was so sweet.
Very wholesome. And there was a lot of sweetness between her and Billy, the main character. He was like a goofy, nerdy guy in the comic books. So maybe I resonated with him also as a young boy thinking, see, I could have my shot with Phoebe Cates, but...
Yeah, all young teenage artists could maybe relate to Billy and thinking, oh, maybe I'll get Phoebe Cates when I grow up.
Yeah.
Phoebe Cates, prior to this movie, was famous for Fast Times at Ridgemont High. You know what? Wasn't Judge Reinhold in Fast Times and also Gremlins?
Yes, although I forgot about that. His part got cut way down for Gremlins, but yeah, he had a big role in Fast Times.
That's right. I forgot about that. And then Corey Feldman was in this movie. That is one thing I completely forgot. Corey Feldman is hanging out with Zach. Zach looks like he's 30 years old, and Corey Feldman looks like he's 9. Are these guys friends, or is Zach babysitting Corey Feldman's character?
He seemed like he was just the kid next door that hung out with the older kid. But yeah, right. It did seem a little strange.
Part of what I loved about this movie is it's like a throwback to like 1950s horror movies, like what is the name of the town they're in? Is called Kingston Falls. Gremlins is just like about the destruction of this town. It's like The Fog or one of those movies. Or
The Blob.
Yes, it's like this town is going to become completely undone. The town reminded me a lot of the town from Back to the Future. I think it might have been filmed in the same place.
Yeah, it definitely had it was something I noticed. We'll talk about Black Christmas next, but this was obviously a Hollywood studio set. It just had that kind of fake look to everything that kind of, it creates a different feeling versus Black Christmas was clearly shot on location. Like that kind of realness comes through in that movie. But it does give it that 1950s kind of everything's perfect and life is good vibe.
It's interesting, how many of these movies were set in like suburbs, right? Poltergeist is another good suburbs horror movie.
Yeah, and then Stranger Things picked up on that too and kept the run going.
Right.
So, kids hang out in their basement, play Dungeons and Dragons. Good setting for some horror.
All right, so you'll be able to talk about some of the background stuff, or you want to talk about favorite scenes?
Let's just get into favorite scenes.
As I was watching it, I just had no question what my favorite scene was. It was the scene in the bar that Phoebe Cates worked in.
Yep.
Everything about it I loved. It was the most number of gremlin characters, and there's like a gambling gremlin, and there's like a gremlin swinging from the fan. And there's a female gremlin like wearing makeup and a dress and high heels or something, and they're all so ridiculous that they're like shooting each other and like trying to smoke 12 cigarettes at once. And there's like a flasher gremlin who's walking around with a little trench coat. Watching this scene, I thought this scene is actually the litmus test for whether or not you're going to like Gremlins 2. Because Joe Dante went all out on Gremlins 2, is where he's like, we're going to have flying gremlins and Batman gremlins and every kind of crazy imaginable gremlin. And in the original, that sequence in the bar is where I feel like is the closest he got to the cartoonish violence and ridiculousness of how far can you take these little wacky gremlin characters. It was really funny. And then like parts of it were genuinely scary. Inexplicably, Phoebe Cates was like working alone. She was the bartender and she's like trying to pour drinks for these gremlins, which I don't quite understand. Alcohol does have water in it. I feel like the rules of the gremlins are always very questionable.
If it's fermented, it's okay, Shawnee.
I didn't realize
the fourth rule that they didn't share in that initial transaction.
Yes. I like if we could just talk about the 3 rules for a second. There's the no bright light. There's the no, don't get them wet. And then you can't feed them after midnight. And even I like this movie so much I went and then watched Gremlins 2 immediately after. And even in Gremlins 2 they were like, what does it mean to say you can't feed them after midnight? What if the gremlin's on an airplane and you cross over
daylight savings time?
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah,
right. Somebody in Gremlins 2 says, what if a gremlin eats something with seeds in it and it gets stuck in his teeth at 11 p.m., but then he swallows it at 1 a.m.? What's going to happen then? So, yeah, the eating after midnight thing, even in making this movie, they were aware that it doesn't quite make sense. But kind of what I like about it is it's kind of like fairy tale rules. Going to turn into a pumpkin. You're not supposed to think about it too much. You're just supposed to understand that midnight represents things going haywire. So my favorite scene was that whole bar scene, and I
love that scene too.
I liked how far he went with the wackiness of the where could you take this. We talked about that a little bit with The Thing, and I was saying it felt like there was a lot more gas in the engine, like they could have done more with the rules of the monster and how it changed. And Gremlins was like, how far can we take this whole idea of what you could do with these creatures and then what their personalities are? God, they were so funny. They were kind of creepy and funny at the same time.
It almost had a few different ways in. Like there was that scene and the movie theater scene too, which they were so chaotic and so many fun little details, and they really leaned into these caricatures, and you could tell they were just having a blast coming up with ideas and bringing it to life with all those details. Like the one gremlin guzzling beer from the tap handle, the guy smoking 3 cigarettes, some of the characters that you described, just really fun. And then they also had the gremlins that were very malicious and doing these horrible murders.
Right.
And so it had kind of like the wacky cartoony flavor, but then it would also like step into that gore dark space too. So there's a couple flavors of how they brought chaos and how they unleashed the mischievous side of their characters in this movie.
I really liked how the movie, I thought, had a perfect tone. And Ghostbusters had this too, of just riding the line between horror and comedy. And then some of the horror was funny, and then some of the comedy was horrible. And I felt like it never went too far in either direction. It didn't get so ridiculous that it lost you, and it didn't get so frightening that it just became overwhelming. There's a scene where Corey Feldman, he's got a slingshot, and he's in his bedroom window firing on gremlins, and there's a gremlin hanging from like a electrical line or something, and then he grabs a pair of scissors and cuts it, and the gremlin goes flying. I think the funny thing about these gremlins is you could do anything you want to them because there's so many, and they're so obnoxious. And the mom at one point, she one of them she kills in a blender, and another one in a microwave.
That was when Mom was kicking ass. She went right for the butcher knife in the kitchen. She was taking no names, but I did remember seeing that as a kid, that whole kitchen scene where she kills one in the blender, thinking that was really disgusting. And then the microwave, that was just,
oh my God,
next level gross when she blows it up in the microwave. I think that was something that I talked about quite a bit with my friends as a middle schooler. Yeah. Microwaves are kind of new back then.
Right.
There was all that, don't put this in there. Like, oh, did you try to explode that thing in the microwave? And then, of course, they toss a gremlin in there, and it's really gross.
Yeah, and I feel like there were urban legends about like people, like kids sticking animals in there.
Yeah,
so,
cats
like,
or whatever.
Yeah. Why cats? Why do people think of cats in microwaves as the main
guess
animal?
they fit. Like, maybe.
Microwaves were also really big back then. Do you remember how big a microwave was?
Yeah, or TV.
They were massive.
Yeah, you have to design your kitchen around one. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So I love the chaos of these characters, and I felt like the movie did a great job building this. I talk about this all the time, both with horror and also with comedy, is when you establish what the joke is or what the fear is, you got to keep leaning in and making it bigger. And there's a part of Gremlins where I guess it's Spike, where he jumps into a swimming pool, like at the YMCA.
Yeah.
And then in the next scene, it looked like they might have done this with like claymation, like animated gremlins. You see like thousands of them like marching into the town.
Oh yeah, coming down the street. Yeah.
Yes, and just the scale and size of like the terror about to be unleashed on this town. There's something about it that I thought it's really fun. You see this perfect little town, and part of you is like, yeah, let's go like destroy it. Like there's this kind of like id. Of these gremlin characters where like you kind of relate to them, like they get to do whatever the hell they want and like throw plates and then smack over Christmas trees, and they just get to go totally wild.
It was probably after that scene where the sheriff and his deputy go into town to investigate the snowplow incident.
Yeah.
The guy's getting attacked by the gremlin, and then you start seeing all this chaos happening, and so they speed off to like, oh, we're getting out of here. It was gremlins climbing on people, houses, light bulbs exploding, the car flips because the gremlins have cut their brakes, and
and the gremlins actually changed the street lights, so that all the lights turn green, and because drivers, if the light is green, they'll just go no matter what.
Totally.
All the cars just start smashing into each other. I don't know. There's something just really delightful about like establishing this like charming little town and then just seeing it completely get annihilated by these tiny little monsters.
And they're very tech savvy. They knew what wires to cut and cross, and I guess harkening back to World War II, where the gremlins got into the equipment and chaos. That's kind of what they were doing here.
Yeah. Okay. So I have a thought about that, but we didn't do your favorite scene.
Oh, well, we have the same favorite scene with the bar. Like that was so good. I also did put the movie scene and sequence.
When they're all watching
runner up, which it was just really fun when you got so many of the gremlins together and they're just going wacky in the movie theater, trying to get the film going, screwing up the projector room.
Right.
Wreaking chaos in the theater, raiding all the snacks, and then lots of little details with the different characters wearing different outfits. And then they finally get Snow White on, and Billy comes in, and Kate is like, "What's going on?" And he's like, "They're watching Snow White, and look, they love it."
Yeah. Also, that's is this movie a Warner Brothers movie?
It was Amblin, but did Warner Brothers own?
I think they're the distributor.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I'm amazed that they got Disney. They got that clip. I feel like Disney would not do this today. They let the gremlins watch Snow White, and all the little gremlins are singing the hi-ho. Yes. And they're in the theater. That really harkened back to the Muppets.
Spot on. Yeah, Muppets.
The other thing about this movie that I thought was fascinating was the guy who wrote it, Christopher Columbus. I saw an interview with him, and he said he came up with this movie because he was living in New York City, and there were mice in his apartment. And that was his first inspiration for tiny little things can actually be incredibly scary. And then he wrote this script, And then Spielberg read it and just fell in love with it. Thought, I could make this. Chris Columbus said it was a lot scarier in its first iteration. It was more of a horror movie. Did you read about that?
Yeah, there was some scenes that they talked about where Billy's mom gets killed by the gremlins and beheaded, and her head gets thrown down the staircase. There was a couple other scenes like that. I mean, that's why if you talk about this movie versus Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters always felt a little bit lighter. Gremlins definitely had a darker side to it that you could see they were leaning into in certain scenes, but it sounds like they wanted to pick the dial to 10 on the evil aspect of it, but pull back.
I'd read an interview with Chris Columbus, and he said there was one scene in an early draft of the script where the gremlins go into a McDonald's and they eat all the customers and leave all the McDonald's food on the table. I find it really interesting. This movie does seem like it melded Chris Columbus's kind of darker ideas plus Steven Spielberg's like more family-friendly, let's make it more fun. And it was Spielberg, I think, that actually said, let's have the Mogwai, Gizmo, be the hero of the movie at the very end and like kill the villain. Chris Columbus wasn't going to have Gizmo be a heroic character at all. He was going to have the little Mogwai just turn into gremlins, and there was going to be no cute little fuzzy character. But Spielberg
just like The Thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah, Spielberg has such a taste for what would be of interest to like 13, 14, 15-year-olds, right? He's in that sweet spot of that age range. Like, I think like Raiders of the Lost Ark is the same way. Star Wars is the same way. It is just like crack for teenage boys.
Well, it also has the ending that the good guys win, and it isn't quite as bleak. So in some ways, it's maybe a little bit more cliche or wholesome, but just feels like the right 80s package. It puts that polish on it at the end where you just feel good when the movie's over versus Gizmo had turned into a true gremlin and gone like that would have been a totally different film.
It would have been so much more horrifying. And the movie did super well. I saw that the budget was $11 million and then it made $200 million. So it was hugely profitable.
Raking in some cash.
I was just delighted by this movie. I forgot how much I loved it. It's definitely one you could go back to and watch every year. And just everything about it works. The characters work. There's the creepy witch-like woman.
Miss Deagle?
Yes, Miss Deagle. She reminded me of like something from the Wicked Witch of the West. She's this evil, I'll get you. Yeah, she wants her dog. She's going to take food out of their mouths. Right. And then when she bites it in the most hilarious way, it's very satisfying. Like, you want the gremlins to take her out because she's such a horrible character.
Yeah, Spike runs up to her house and he's like, Deagle, Deagle, Deagle. And then he breaks in and then she's in the kitchen feeding her 20 cats or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then she hears the Christmas carolers outside. And she runs to the door and then she's got a pitcher of water in her hand that she's about to throw over the Christmas carolers. And then it's the gremlins.
So she sees that the Christmas carolers are actually gremlins. I like that they dress up as carolers.
Very wholesome.
I mean, where are the gremlins finding all those perfectly sized outfits?
The finishing sequence for her where Spike hacks her chair assist lift up of that semicircular staircase.
Yes.
So she gets on it, and it's turbo boost. It just rockets her out the window.
Yeah, that scene of her going up on that chair and it shoots her around and she flies out the window. Man, is that a satisfying sequence. I was trying to figure out, why are these horror scenes so funny? It very much is like a Warner Brothers cartoon.
Yeah.
Right? It feels like very like Bugs Bunny or something like that. It was like maybe the first time as a kid I saw a live action movie that had the physics and the logic of a cartoon.
They did it just right. For the humor meets violence, and it's still entertaining. And then right after this, because we were talking about some of the other kind of small creature films, this movie spawned them all. And there was Ghoulies, there was Critters.
There's a bunch of them.
Yeah, they created a whole genre. Those all came out right after Gremlins. And then by the time you got to Gremlins 2, I think a lot of people had moved on, or this wasn't as dominant in popular culture as it had been, because I never saw Gremlins 2. Yeah,
really?
No, I'll have to go watch it though.
Yeah, so that's funny. It came out in 1990 when we were seniors in high school at that point.
We were seeing other stuff by then.
Right, and so they really missed their window. And then Gremlins 2 tanked. It cost like $30 or $40 million, and then it only made $40 million. It doesn't have the same kind of joy as the original.
One thing that did stick out to me, the dad is this guy who's a bit of a failure. He's this inventor who keeps coming up with stuff. He's got all these great ideas, but nothing really seems to work out, or he's not able to pull it off.
His dad's kind of like a dreamer. That was also something I wondered about in the original. I don't know if you picked up on this, but I made a note that the theme of the Gremlins is technology versus nature. Because technology is constantly disappointing people. Like Billy's car. He's always trying to start that little, what does he have, a Volkswagen?
A VW Bug, yeah.
Yeah, and it never can start. And he's got his neighbor who is traumatized from the war, who's constantly saying, oh, the Japanese cars and Japanese TVs, they never work. Buy American. Right. But technology is constantly letting you down. And the dad's inventions are like that. He's got this like orange juice maker that sucks. He's got this like egg cracking device. Like technology is like always unreliable. Whereas nature, though, in the movie, represented by the Gremlins, is overwhelming, and human beings are unable to totally control it. And the Chinese man who they buy the Mogwai from at the very beginning, he appears at the end, and he has a line about that, about like, you guys aren't ready, and you have to respect the power of nature. And so I obviously when I was a kid, I didn't pick up on that, but it seemed really clear watching it this time that the movie was about like nature versus technology. And it's not actually saying one versus the other. It's sort of like saying technology will always lead you astray if you lean on it too much. But nature is uncontrollable and unmanageable if you don't like respect it and respect how powerful it is.
You did follow the rules.
I found that really powerful and interesting. Did you like the ending sequence with the chainsaw? So you think that was an homage to Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Yeah. Well, he shoots him in the arm with a crossbow bolt, and then he's coming at him with the chainsaw, and you're watching it, and at first I was thinking, oh, he's got a metal bat, but no, it's wood. And he's really taking his time to get through. They keep cutting back, and more of the bat's missing. Yeah. I was like, wow, like dragging this out. We had talked about Pumpkinhead before, and this was our second film that we've had the dog named Mushroom show up in. This was his first movie. And so Mushroom had a lot of screen time. It was in the beginning, going into the bank, but in that final scene, he's running around with Gizmo and chasing him as Gizmo's driving that car through the department store. Mushroom was really quite active and energetic, and really delivered an incredible performance in this film. Hats off to Mushroom. Then
the Gremlins harass Mushroom. They like tie him up in Christmas lights, but he doesn't get like killed or anything. He's just like irritated.
In one of the drafts, they had killed the dog, but apparently they backed off on that one too. So killing the mom and the dog was too much for this one. So
Spielberg's like, you're not killing a dog. Go back and write draft number 27.
He's like, this isn't the thing, guys.
Yes, exactly. No, you're not beheading the mom. Try again.
Yeah, I do think that may be why we actually get some heat for this, because some people don't think this is a horror film at all. But it is kind of dancing in that kind of horror comedy, horror light space. But I'm gonna keep it in the horror camp. I think it's our podcast. We're gonna make the call on this one. But
absolutely,
tell us if you feel different.
Yeah, I'm actually curious. Because when I think of Gremlins, I think of it kind of like a comedy. Like, what I like about it is how funny it is. But when you watch the movie, there's a lot of horrible things that happen to people.
Right.
The mayhem of the movie is just a lot of fun. But it's not like a gross out movie where there's like tons of, huge body count and tons of people being slashed one at a time. So there is this gleeful kind of mayhem. I think it's time for stabby ratings.
All right. I think I went first on the thing last time. What do you got, Shawnee?
I feel like there's no way I cannot give this 5 stars. I actually loved this movie as a kid, and watching it again years and years later, I thought it was just as much fun. It holds up. It's still just as entertaining. Now, I'll tell you, my wife was watching it with me. She is not as entertained by Gremlins as I am. She liked The Thing. I'll give her credit for that. She just liked some of these movies.
Okay.
But inexplicably, she did not like Gremlins. And I just found it delightful. And I realized that horror comedy is actually my favorite kind of movie. It might be why I like Ghostbusters so much. I think we should look for more of that stuff. And there's a bunch of good ones from the 80s.
Yeah, I agree. I love the horror comedy.
So what's your stabby rate?
So we just watched The Thing, and we gave that one 5 stabs. So I was really hesitant to roll in with a similar rating. Am I not being critical enough? But same. Yeah. I loved this movie as a kid. I loved rewatching it. I'm giving it 5 stabs as well. This one's up there in the top 5
Top
movies
tier.
as a kid from years ago, and I still loved it. It was super fun. It is questionable in terms of the spectrum of horror. Is it a true horror movie? I think it's got enough in there to put it in the camp, but everything we just talked about with how fun the scenes were, how incredibly inventive it was with the action and the way they added all these detail to the Gremlins. It did hold up for me. I loved it. 5 steps back to back. This is a SlashBack first. Maybe we're just getting soft, but I thought
We'll
it was
see.
Good stuff. Yeah.
We'll see what happens with the next movie. That is all for the Gremlins. Thanks so much for listening to SlashBack Cinema. I am Shawnee Luft.
And I'm Brian Dreimler.
We really appreciate you listening. If you saw Gremlins and loved it as much as we did, or if you were never a big fan of the movie, or if you were traumatized as a kid, please drop us a line and let us know. You can go to slashbackcinema.com. You can see us. Ryan, what are our socials?
SlashBack Cinema on Instagram. We're on TikTok. Yeah. And I would just like to say that we're putting the ho, ho, ho back in horror the entire month of December. So please tune back in and tell your friends to join us for the next installment of our holiday horror series.
That's right. Every Tuesday in December, we're going to watch another Christmas horror movie. And we're kicking it off with a good one, Gremlins.